Welcome to episode 2 of What's That Sound podcast. My name is Stu Watts, and today my guest is Jon Grace. Jon is an alternative rock producer from Melbourne, Australia. Today we talk about his vetting process of figuring out whether he's going to work with clients, why pre-production is so important, as well as his other mixing choices and how to get crunchy sounding guitars and really clear vocals. All that and more on this episode of What's That Sound podcast.
You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts.
What's up? I am here with Jon Grace. Jon, welcome to What's That Sound podcast.
Thanks for having me, mate.
No worries, no worries. For anyone that doesn't know you, do you mind giving us a bit of a rundown of what it is and what you do currently?
Yep. So I'm a music producer and a studio owner. So I've been working in recording studios since about 2012. And then just recently, as of last year, I took over the studio in which I was working in since 2014 and done a full rebrand, restructure, full renovate, and now that's kind of my main thing. It's just
unreal.
Taking
And that's
care of the studio.
Marigold Recordings?
Marigold Recordings, formerly known as Homesurgery.
Yep. Nice one. And so give us a bit of a rundown of kind of where it all started for you in terms of music. Where did music come into your life?
Definitely the first time I heard Rage Against the Machine was like the real kind of penny drop moment. But I mean, I'm like other people, like I had a parent who got me onto music in terms of helped me kind of hone in on what I liked. So two of my dad's favorite bands are the Beatles and Midnight Oil.
Yep.
And then he also likes U2, which these days I'm not really too big on, but when I was little, I loved listening to U2. So when I first heard Rage, I think it was kind of like the combination of good songwriting, angry politics, and guitar wizardry. So it just kind of was a natural progression from those three things, I think.
Yeah. And was there any kind of what age was this, by the way? Were you a teenager?
I remember hearing Midnight Oil for the first time when I was 4.
Yep.
And Dad had a copy of Blue Sky Mining, which turned into my copy of Blue Sky Mining.
Yep.
Yeah, and
nice.
Yeah, I still love that band to this day. Like I went and saw them at the Melbourne show recently with Dad and got COVID, and it was totally worth it.
To see Midnight Oil, I'd say that's pretty worth it.
Yeah. So that was around 4. I heard Rage for the first time when I was 9, and I saw The Matrix.
Yeah,
and
nice.
rolling the credits with Wake Up, and I was just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. That song is just an explosion, really. Like, I mean, that
It's
whole
incredible.
album is unbelievable, of course.
Yeah.
But that song's
Absolutely.
huge. I love it. And so that kind of started your love for music. And
Yeah,
where
100%.
did it go from there?
Well, hearing Rage made me want to learn how to play the drums. And to this day, Brad Wilk is still probably my favorite rock drummer. I very much fell into that immature hole of mum and dad going, all right, if you want to learn the drums, you're going to get practice pads, and then you're going to do it for a year, and then we'll buy you a drum kit.
Yep.
And that just kind of put water on the fuse. Like I was just like, I hate hitting this rubber thing. This is not fun at all. I want to hear loud noises. So I kind of gave that up. And then a couple of years after that, I decided to give the guitar a go, and then just immediately fell in love. And from essentially 13 onwards, went on and did year 12 solo music. Nearly went and did the contemporary jazz course at Monash, but after year 12, I was just burnt out from playing 5-6 hours a day, that I was just like, I don't want this to kind of be something that I studied to the point of hating it.
That's fair,
Yeah.
You still want to have the love for it, for sure.
Exactly.
And then was that always just like the playing music? Was there any of the engineering, production, recording sort of stuff at that
all
stage?
That all kind of came later. So instead of doing the contemporary jazz thing, I went and did a Bachelor of Arts, and then the intention there was to go and do postgrad law. I got into postgrad law, and in the first week I was just like, I do not want to do this. I don't think I'll be happy doing this. The degree is going to put me in over $100,000 of debt.
Yeah.
I think there's a better way. So I took a year off and just kind of worked jobs here and there. But in that time, I got my hands on a loop pedal.
Nice.
And it all just kind of started from there. So like I was just kind of doing solo guitar stuff on a loop pedal, trying to find ways to emulate the sound of kick drums and snare drums with octave pedals and distortion pedals. And then going from that, I was just kind of like going, all right, cool. So if I put too many layers on, I can't hear shit. What's the go with that? And then that turned into Google, which turned into YouTube holes, which turned into learning about things like phase and panning and comb filtering and all those kind of things. And then from there, I just kind of went, all right, maybe I'll get a bit more in depth in home recording. And then from that, I decided to do a Bachelor of Audio at SAE.
Yep.
Which, I mean, I've got mixed feelings about, because I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't done it, but I feel like I would have been where I am a lot quicker if I'd taken a step back and thought about it a bit more. So long story short, with SAE, halfway through my degree, I hooked up with Tom Larkin, who was the former owner of the studio of Homesurgery.
Yep.
And then very, very quickly just became the studio assistant, was pretty much in here every day. And then a few months down the track, I had all these urgent emails from SAE going, where have you been? You haven't done any work. You haven't been to any classes. So I went in for a meeting and I told them what I'd been doing. And they're like, that's great. If you write 500 words on what it's like to work in a studio, we'll give you a degree. So I'm like, all right. So didn't finish the degree, but got the degree.
That's crazy. I mean, that's a pretty unique story. I don't think many other people would have had something like that happen that way. That's pretty cool. I mean, I went to TAFE and it was a similar sort of thing. I studied there for, 2 years or so. And it's a similar thing. Like, you get the foundational understanding of things, you meet people, the environment's cool because you get your hands on, some gear and you're around that environment, but it's not anything like the real world. So, but you got to start somewhere and you got to meet people and that sort of thing too. So
exactly.
That's awesome. So who were your, so you've talked about Rage Against the Machine. Did you have any idols in terms of audio like right at the start?
No, like that was, once again, like that whole kind of realm of production and engineering came to me much later than my love of music. A lot of it comes down from, I guess I still have this attitude of, when it comes to doing things like fixing electronics or things like that, it's like, I don't really want to know how much it works. I just want to play with it. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, but at the end of the day, like later on, I was just like, all right, cool. How do these people do things? How do they use their tools and all that kind of stuff? So no one early on, but when I started getting into it, I mean, I'm a big Radiohead fan, so I liked Nigel. I liked reading up about Nigel Godrich. And then from there, also Alan Moulder, who has made a lot of records that I love very dearly. And then, I mean, in terms of sonic stuff, like I'm a huge Chad Blake fan. I love how much he mangles stuff and distorts stuff and, gets a lot more creative and a lot more unconventional than, say someone like an Andrew Sheps, who's quite
real.
I would call him clean and vanilla compared to Chad Blake, who's got a big chocolate ripple through his stuff.
Well, that's the thing. I think listening to your stuff that you've worked on, which we'll obviously get into a little bit more, what I notice is that your stuff has an organic quality to it. It sounds analog, but you've got really crunchy guitars and really upfront vocals and hard-hitting drums when it's necessary. Some of your stuff, obviously, there's a bit more of a laid-back sort of a drum sound, but generally speaking, you're really going for that intensity, that crunch, that distortion. You're pushing things, so I love that. Was that
very much.
Is that always the way that you kind of went about it, or was it just like a fun thing to do at the time?
I mean, getting into it, I was a lot more cautious in terms of like, making sure the gain staging is right and making sure that's clean and doing all that kind of stuff. But then, I guess when I started working with Tom, he very much kind of instilled that ethos of make it exciting, make it, try and draw out the adrenaline in the listener, because at the end of the day, no one's going to be sitting back and going, that's really good gain structure. They're going to be talking about the emotional impact of the song, which is a big one for me in terms of listening to music, but then also producing music, is like, how do we make this impact emotionally? And so a lot of the times with faster stuff, that, it just usually means crunchy guitars and big splatty drums.
Yeah, nice. So obviously Tom would have played quite a big role in your learning at the start, and, for those years that you were working alongside him. Can you give us a little bit more of an insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, the two best pieces of advice he gave me was don't stop and don't be shit.
Second one a bit harder to quantify.
I was like, I'll do my best. But yeah, so I mean, Tom's value in terms of production really comes from the songwriting level as opposed to the technical level. So that was a huge one for me, is like kind of going, it doesn't matter how well you record a song. Like, if it's a good song, then it's going to work in whatever way you present it. If it's not a great song, then, cool, you've got a really pristine sounding snare for a song that's not great.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where he taught me to really kind of think away from the train spotter element of this whole world of, audio production, in the sense of like, no one's, like 99% of the people out there aren't analyzing the snare sound. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the song always comes first.
100%.
So that's your approach. Do you get to do pre-production with all of the bands that you work with?
I pretty much insist on it.
Yep.
So, so when I do a production, like, I'll usually allocate time for pre-production and then time for actual tracking. The mentality there is that if you can kind of dissect the work up into two different blocks of tasks that involve different parts of your brain, then you're able to focus more on those tasks, as opposed to kind of meshing things together and then kind of moving back and forth. So, for example, like if I was to do a single, I'll do one day of pre-pro with the band where we essentially would, and this is obviously a case-by-case thing, so sometimes this might not really even be necessary, but we'll spend a day stripping the song back essentially to its core elements. And the way I judge whether a song is working or not is if it's able to be translated with just a vocal and an acoustic guitar, or a vocal and a piano. So in its core elements, and then if that's all working, anything you put on top of that is just kind of dressing for something that foundationally is really, really good. So first day I would always go, all right, cool, let's strip it down, let's workshop things. There's classic brainstorming mentality of there's no bad ideas.
Yep.
Sometimes bad ideas can be really stupid and that they actually work because they're so stupid. Or sometimes bad ideas will trigger a good idea in someone else, or like a bad idea might be a good idea that's just needs to be reversed or something like that. So that on the first day, and then once that's all finished and we have a mapped out print of everything, that means we go home, get rest, come in, and then the next day it's pure execution. You're not worried about, that metering change in the pre-chorus, or you're not worried about where that double snare hits. You're worried about going, how do I get down what we worked on yesterday, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I love it. And so that pre-production process, does that look like you guys sitting in the room all together, or are you kind of off to the side, just kind of talk back in the monitoring room, or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, once again, case by case. So sometimes you have a band that can only really function when everyone's playing together. So in those instances, I usually just have everyone set up so that they can play together with talkback going. But whenever there's any sort of like bigger structural changes, I'll bring them in and then just take it back to the acoustic and the vocal, or the piano and the vocal, and then go back out and flesh out that change as a band, because it's one of those things where you do that and then every now and again the lead guitarist or the bassist will put something over that just kind of strengthens the change that we've already done. But then when there's other bands that kind of function better when they work individually, then I'll kind of go, all right, cool, let's all just sit in the room together, 2-3 acoustic guitars, show us what you're doing, then just kind of go from there.
And how do you kind of figure that out, I guess? Is there a way that happens every single time, or does the people that you're working with like to tell you, hey, I do this all by myself, or do you kind of have a way of sorting through that?
I just kind of go by the feel of it. So if I try one way and it feels clunky or inorganic, or there's like some sort of mental resistance at play from the people involved, then I've learned to kind of identify that quite quickly, and then we kind of shift course very quickly as well. Yeah. So it's one of those things of just making sure I've got like 2 or 3 platforms set up so that if one fails, we can just quickly move to the next one.
100%. And when those sorts of issues happen in the studio, like, I like to talk about dealing with adversity, because it's one of the things as a producer, you wear so many different hats. You know, you're a psychologist, you're trying to work on interpersonal skills between the band, you're kind of giving them advice. If they've never recorded before, it's such a strange environment for someone to be in when all they've done before is, you know, play in a room together or play on stage together. It's drastically differently each time. So what does that look like in terms of, sometimes, you know, people don't uncover themselves, they kind of are quite guarded. What does that dealing with adversity look like in the studio for you?
In terms of like dealing with people who are guarded and kind of reluctant to jump,
you know, potentially just like a negative environment.
Gotcha. I actually have, as like a gateway point into the sessions, I've got like a bit of a veto process where if I talk to someone or someone reaches out to me, then I kind of go through stages of usually like 2 emails, a phone call, and then a meet in person before we even jump in the studio.
Yep.
Kind of gives me a sense of like not only the personalities I'll be working with, but also whether I'm the best suited person for what they want. And so there are times when I go through that process and then I'll meet up with them in person, and then it's like, oh, you know what? I reckon, you know, producer X, producer Y, like these other people than me will actually do a much better job at what you want. You know, which, you know, from a financial point of view sometimes stings, because just like, all right, cool, well, I guess I'm not getting this one. But it's one of those things where like I don't want to jump into something where I'm not 100% sure that I can deliver for the client.
Yep.
So beyond that, in terms of dealing with people's involvement in the process or like kind of reticence or anything like that, I've got a few rules kind of in place in terms of how we conduct ourselves in pre-pro, how we conduct ourselves in recording. Once again, things I learned from Tom, which he learned from Garth, who produced the first Rage Against the Machine record and also a couple of Shihad records.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And a lot of them is like, you know, things like, I welcome arguments in the studio as long as the argument is for the idea and for the song and not for personal agendas.
Yeah.
All like little things like that kind of put in place at the start of the session allows me to kind of set essentially a paddock for us to work in. And then if someone starts to stray outside of that, it's just a matter of reminding, hey, we're all here for this, and this is the best way, I think, for us to kind of operate. Yeah. We need you to kind of participate for us to get a result.
Yeah, totally. And then on the flip side of that, what does a good session look like? So, you know, obviously a bad session is where people might not be, you know, giving up their full impact of the song, or they're not giving their best performances and things like that. What's a good time in the studio look like to you?
A good time in the studio is when everyone involves themselves in the process. Everyone respects each other. Everyone shows, you know, emotional involvement in the process, and like that can be gross and ugly sometimes as well, but if it's with that intent of we want this to be the best it can be, then it's a really, really fun process to kind of be involved with. That then usually ties in with people willing to try new ideas, willing to, you know, throw spaghetti at the wall and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I think a good session as well is when everyone is involved in throwing ideas onto the table. So like sometimes you'll get like a band where maybe like, you know, half of the band might take the lead and the other half will kind of sit back. Yeah. When everyone kind of gets involved, that's when songs can get quite cohesive, and that's when, you know, when the bassist starts thinking about the kick pattern and then starts thinking about the guitar rhythm, and then the vocalist starts thinking about the drum pattern and how to wrap the vocal around it and all that kind of stuff. So it's when people kind of get to that stage of realizing the complexity that can be in things that seem quite simple, and then just trying things, and then from that, like in that whole kind of splitting up of pre-pro and recording, if you go through that process on the first day like that and it goes smoothly, then they're more likely on the second day to be willing to try new ideas that we hadn't thought of because we've already got what we needed to. So, for example, we've already laid down the lead vocal or something like that, and go, hey, what if we slightly change this phrase in here to kind of do that because it happens here and here and things like that. So
yeah,
I
love it.
So yeah, a good session is pure involvement from everyone who is in the studio, and also when drums are tuned and guitars are set up and everyone's able to play their parts.
Yeah. Oh, we've all been there when, there's something about the record button for a lot of musicians where they just forget how to play.
Yeah.
And there's nothing better than someone that's practiced in the studio.
Injects a tremble in their spine.
Yeah. I love it. And so for you, are you more of like an early riser or a late finisher? Because some people love being in the studio late at night, and some people like to just use the daytime as their kind of like, this is my time.
I'm a 10 till 8, 11 till 9 kind of guy. So I like having a life. I like being able to go home and unwind, but I also like being able to kind of have a slow start to the morning, kind of getting up 7:30, 8, have a coffee, cuddle my cat.
That's important, man. It's important.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and it's one of those things as well where if you're ever involved in like a longer session, having a regimented time of this is when we start and this is when we finish is such a good way to kind of get into the flow of the session, especially if there's all these kind of parameters in which we're working within. So yeah, I mean, my typical day would be like a 10 till 8. But having said that, there have been some significant outliers from that. So.
Nice. Let's talk more about the actual, stuff that you've worked on. Okay. Obviously you've done some pretty amazing stuff recently, with like things like
Thanks,
Seattle, Baker's Eddy. These are some really, really great acts that are showcasing rock and roll music in Australia. And they're just kind of doing their thing. They're not really sounding like anyone else, I think. They're kind of going, there's obviously a rock and a pop and a punk element to a lot of the stuff that you work on. But is that the sort of stuff that you love, or is it more just that kind of comes to you?
It's a bit of both, really. It's the kind of thing where the more it comes to me, the more I wish other stuff did as well, because it's I can get bored pretty quickly, so like I like working on a variety of different genres with different people and different sounds and things like that. But yeah,
do you inject a lot of your personal musical interests into your productions, or 100%. Do you like to let the artist dictate what they want it to sound like?
Well, I 100% I dictate my own musical taste, because I think that's kind of, part of the role a producer should play. This is a controversial opinion, but I don't really like Steve Albini and his philosophy of like, I'm just here to kind of capture like, just like, I don't want to make a documentary. I want to make a film. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
So
yep.
I definitely inject personal taste in there, but it's always, at the most part, on that first kind of pre-pro chunk of time.
Right.
Because that then gives the artist the ability to veto it if they don't like it. It's one of those things as well where like if I make a suggestion, or if a band member makes a suggestion about a change, one of the kind of guidelines I have is that you have to kind of justify it. You have to be able to explain why you think that should be the case, what it's serving in the narrative of the song. And so, yeah, I'll do that with my own personal taste of like, hey, this band did this kind of thing at this point. What if we tried a similar thing?
Yep.
And then on top of that, like, I mean, can get pretty loose with my use of EBO, which Smashing Pumpkins really kind of put into me.
Yeah. Look, it's all ear candy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll get to the nerdy plugins and sounds and that sort of thing, but let's stick more to the song. Does the song kind of tell you straight away how you want it to sound? Or is it more of a discussion of, we think that, you know, this song has, you know, for example, a Smashing Pumpkins element to it. Let's try and make it sound like that. Or is it more like, let's let the song breathe and kind of find its own sonic characteristic?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big context dependent one. So sometimes, you know, all of those things can happen in different sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're working with bands, is it mostly on like a single basis, or do you do EPs, albums?
Yeah, I mean, I do all of them. So, I mean, usually when I have like a first time client, it will be a single just to kind of get a feel for it.
Yep.
And then make sure that they're not making too much of an investment in something that might not be their flavor. But then, yeah, it's just one of those things where the more people come back, the longer the sessions seem to be.
The reason why I asked that there was because, you know, sometimes when you have a bunch of different songs, that allows you to then delve into, okay, this is what this band sounds like. When you're getting a single, it can be sometimes difficult to know, am I doing this the right way? Am I giving this the sound that they...
Yeah. I think the conversation I have around that, and it might sound gross initially, but whenever I think about the kind of single in terms of like the band sound, I think of it as an advertisement for the band. And so that's one of the things I say in the pre-pro is like, so how do we want to present you to the world if this is like the 3.5 minutes we have? And so when it comes to, you know, in terms of injecting musical taste or letting the song breathe or whatnot, like I in my veto process, I have a very extensive conversation about references. Both in terms of overall sound and then specific elements within sound. So, you know, you'll get a band that will go, I really, really like At the Drive-In, but I really want like a Billie Eilish vocal over At the Drive-In. So things like that. And so within that, my favorite thing to do in terms of producing is to limit the palette as much as possible so that we're not spending hours on end chasing things that might not work, but rather go, all right, cool. So we need something for this chorus that fits into these references. We've got ideas A, B, C, and D. Let's try them all and see which is best. And then usually it's E, which is an amalgamation of all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really good exercise anyway. I think for people, again, that haven't been in the studio, that they potentially have these ideas of how it's going to go down. We're going to have so much time. We're going to be able to, you know, mic up amps for a whole day, et cetera, et cetera. Where it's like, actually, let's just try and find something, a mold that your sound can fit into or the song can fit into, and let's really just hone in on that and try and get the best out of that exact small. We're using this one microphone for all the guitars, you know, things like that. So I love it,
like, you know, I once had years ago I had I've forgotten the name, which is really bad. But it was a pop punk band, and the singer was like, I can't wait to shoot out every vocal mic in the studio. And I was like, man, you're in a pop punk band. Like, I'm not putting any ribbons near you. I'm not going to put you on like a fucking 57. Like, you're going into this.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Let's dive into that gear, get nerdy conversation. What are your go-tos? What are your go-to mics? Let's start off with mics.
Context dependent as well, man.
Cool.
Like, I mean,
I
think my favorite mics are the Coles 4038s just because I find it really hard to record overheads without them. They're just so special. I love them on like drum rooms. I love them as like room mics for guitar cabs. They're fucking incredible.
Yeah.
And then in terms of other stuff, I'm a huge fan of the AKG 414s.
Yep.
So I would say maybe 80% of the time I'll have those on a guitar cab.
Yep.
Usually on a bass cab. And I've also been doing a lot of stuff lately where I'll take the resonant head off the kick drum and then just have the 414 inside it.
Yep.
And then just do the classic thing of, you know, if I want extra elements out of it, duplicating it in Pro Tools and then processing it differently.
Yeah, nice. Sick. And your process for recording, is it always the same in terms of what you're going through, preamps, that sort of thing? Or is it different depending on the song?
Yeah, depending on the song. So like I'm a big fan of like listening to I mean, like there's like the references play a part in that, but then also just the part itself. So if it's like a spikier sounding guitar, I'd like to record it as something that kind of shaves off a bit of that spike. So chuck it through a Neve preamp, or if I want the bass to punch a bit more, I'm going to chuck it through an API.
Yeah.
So once again, context dependent. I think that's all part of it, is just kind of not only experimenting with song structure and arrangement, but also preamps on different elements and things like that. So I do that quite a bit. Sometimes it throws people off a little bit because I'll be silent for like 10 minutes and just telling them to stop and start, and I'm just away patching, and then after the fact I'm like, I just wanted to kind of take care of this so that we can do this, and then I'm putting that there so that later on we can put that there, and it's just like a big game of chess sometimes.
Yeah, nice one. And let's talk more about in the box. When you're mixing, again with your songs, they have a certain sound, like I described before, but I still think that every song that I listen to of yours has its own flavor, which I love. I'm a really big fan of letting the song have its own sound, so it's identifiable. Is there a common process for mixing, or is it different every time?
I mean, my master bus stays pretty much the same every time. In terms of like instrument buses, they're usually pretty much the same, but I think the way I get different sounds out of different songs is that I shoot stuff through for example, my regular drum bus, and there's something lacking, I'll just make another bus and then just keep adding buses. If there's like, just kind of going, all right, cool, what's going through my drum bus? It's, it's still a little bit soft, so I'll just make another like a transient designer punch bus, or a guitar pedal drum bus, or, just like a tape saturation drum bus. So yeah, I mean, like my template my templates stay relatively the same, and then whenever the song kind of feels like it needs it, I just add to it.
Yeah, beautiful. Is there some go-to plugins that you're really loving at the moment, or?
They're kind of boring, but I mean, FabFilter Pro Q is just incredible. Probably I wouldn't know how many instances on it are on every mix, but it's a lot. The McDSP ML4000 is on every mix. It's on my master bus. It's on my bass bus. It's a fucking crucial tool for me.
Unreal.
So are you familiar with that one?
I haven't used it. Nah. I've seen it. I've seen it in tutorials and stuff like that, but I haven't used it myself.
It's fantastic. Like, you can really shape things and make them sound drastically different, or you can really use them to kind of add a bit more weight and dimension to stuff that's already there. So super versatile tool.
Unreal.
What else? What else do I love? I mean, SansAmp is such a fun one to play with as well. Like that, I often have a SansAmp bus of just like a mono bus, usually kick snare and sometimes toms.
Cool. Just crush it.
Just crush it, yeah. And then what else? The other one I've been playing with, which I really like, is the Kush Audio Pusher.
Right.
Which is kind of like a big splatty kind of distorto compressor kind of thing. Yeah, it's fucking fantastic. So, and the other Kush one as well is the AR1, which is their Abbey Road style bus compressor.
Right. Yep.
So that is a really, really great compressor.
Unreal. Yeah. And do you have a favorite element that you like to work on in mixes? Is it like, I'm a big vocal guy, I love guitars, I love drums?
I love drums. Yeah, drums, man. Like, so that was the whole thing, is like the drums are still my favorite instrument. It was the thing I was first drawn to. I like to make the drums as exciting as possible. So that's pretty much where I would say like 70% of my focus is.
Love it. Yeah. Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. So in terms of your workflow when it comes to mixing, because I think it's obviously quite an intricate approach, and everyone's approach is different. So when it comes to workflow for mixing, what does that usually look like? Do you always start in the same way, end in the same way? Give us a bit of an insight into
Pretty
that.
pretty much. So I tend to enjoy spreading out a mix over a couple of days. The first day, just kind of prepping the session, making sure all the edits are fine, aligning the vocals, things like that, making sure that, there's no, crummy snare hit here and there. And then from that, I then just get like rough levels going. Like I import the template, get the rough levels going, and then once the levels are kind of there and I'm happy, I just kind of put it down. And then come back the following day and then just kind of do all the crazy shit, just putting vocal effects on, making the drums distorted, widening the guitars, all that kind of stuff. So similar kind of ethos in like that pre-pro versus tracking kind of thing of like taking care of one element, like quite technical stuff, and then getting a bit more flary and creative on the second day. Yeah,
beautiful. Do you have any hacks that, shit word, but do you have any hacks that you can advise people that might just be starting off mixing in an approach sort of mindset?
I mean, I would say that process was like a huge life hack for me because if you're trying to kind of deal with edits whilst you're trying to do like delay throws and things like that, your brain's going all over the joint. So I would definitely try and come up with a system that works for you to be able to kind of execute a mix as quickly as possible, because the quicker you can do it, the quicker you can do the next one. And then at the end of the day, the more you are capable of mixing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It's like your brain gets into certain areas, and if you're constantly shooting back and forth, that's when I find that people's mixes can be all over the place from one song to another because they're doing things differently each time, and there's no one set approach. So I really like that.
There's rabbit holes out there.
Oh, absolutely. And you got to go down them because that's where you learn, and that's where you have fun. That's like,
and sometimes you find a rabbit.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. What's do you have any tracks that you've been or engineers that you've been listening to recently that you're like, man, their mixes are kicking. They're just going.
I mean, working here at Homesurgery has meant that I've worked alongside Samuel Sproull.
Yep.
And he masters all of my stuff, and his songwriting chops and mix chops are just so I'm so envious of his ears and his ability. He's been getting quite deeply into synthesis the last few years. So he's currently in a band with Matt Wright from the Getaway Plan called Halves.
Nice.
And then every now and again he'll shoot me through a mix to have a listen to, and I'm just like, oh my god, dude, this is absolutely fantastic. So another artist he's been working with where I'm loving the mixes with Montgomery.
Okay.
And then the other producer who I've really liked listening to their progression and their sound is Jared Nettle, who's been working with Teenage Jones.
Yeah.
I just think like mix after mix coming from him from Teenage Jones has just been fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome. What is a good
that
mix?
latest track, Terrible, is just so good.
Yeah, sick. What's a good mix sound like to you then? Like what do you find that you notice like, oh man, this is awesome, and is it the same every time?
I mean, a big one for me is usually mixes that make my production brain turn off, where I'm not focused on it. It's just seamless. Everything is just working. Everything's in its place and it's all serving a purpose. But at the same time, like, I mean, I don't really know anyone in Melbourne who mixes like this at the moment, but like a lot of kind of early 90s Tom Waits stuff, like where everything sounds broken and things sound distant, and there's like a really interesting use of space and percussion. Like I love that stuff as well. But once again, that's all stuff that turns my analytical brain off and I just kind of sink into the music. And so I think that's one of those things is like the more you learn about production, the more you can hear production and you kind of get like a matrix vision for, you know, how compression's interacting with things, or if someone's hitting the master bus too hard, things like that. And then when I listen to stuff where that part of me turns off, I'm just like, this is fantastic.
No, that's a good point, because that's why we all got into music in the first place, is because you know, you just get lost in music and something just takes over. You go into like a meditative state. It's crazy. So something that allows you to do that again, like you said, when you've got this brain of, over analytical. We're always listening for song structure, chord progressions, mixing approach, all that sort of thing. It is so cool when you can just be like, this is amazing. A recent one for me was the newest Block Party album.
Oh yeah,
that sounds so good. There's some unreal guitar tones on that one as well. But
I haven't actually had to listen to that one, but I'll check it out.
It's
I actually had a funny moment talking about Block Party. I worked with a really young band. The bands are just getting younger and younger. But I worked with a band of around 19-year-olds back in Feb, and they played me some demos. I was like, there is like some real kind of Silent Alarm era Block Party things at play here. Do you guys like that record? And they're like, who the fuck are Block Party?
Yeah. Yeah, it's depressing, isn't it? It's depressing. So funny. Let's finish off on the advice front. Let's talk. What are some of the best pieces of advice you could possibly give? First of all, engineers or producers, and then we'll talk artists.
It's a hard one to kind of give engineers and producers advice because, I mean, I'm of the opinion that everyone has their own set of tools and their own brain to use those tools. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if stuff's working for you, then, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. I mean, the big one for me personally is having systems in place so that I know I can hit deadlines, so I know I can, you know, take care of A, B, and C in X amount of time. Sorry to get mathy. Yeah, I mean, I would say better advice that I could give on that front would be people trying to kind of enter the studio game. So like, you know, interns and assistant engineers and things like that. Because it's one of those funny things where you have like all those kind of institutes and they kind of spit out people that have never actually set foot in a studio or been involved in a proper session. So the best advice is to just kind of listen and stay out the way, I would say, and learn when appropriate times are to ask questions so that you don't get in the way of people's thought processes or the band trying to workshop a song. And then just kind of be open to the fact that maybe, you know less than you think you do if you're, and I mean, I'm the same as well. Like I go into every session kind of going, I'm probably working with people who are much more musically adept than me. So that's just one thing to navigate is making sure that you approach everything with a degree of humility. In terms of music and bands, I would say great advice would be to just not stop. Like, you know, don't spend 6 months on a single and then expect that to reap a return like for a year after that if you don't do anything to follow up. So I find a lot of bands don't understand the import. Oh, my whole light's gone. Sorry about that. I find a lot of bands don't understand the importance of momentum and just making sure that, or just the idea that if you have essentially like a 18-month to 2-year plan of releases and promoting your releases, that's a really, really easy way for prospective managers, booking agents, and labels to take notice of you. So like, if you're really, really lucky, you release that one song and then that will change everything. But for the most part, all the bands I know that are successful have just been plugging away. So, I mean, you know, you mentioned Baker's Eddy before. They're a great example of that, where they basically were playing for years together in New Zealand all through high school, touched down in Melbourne, and then just didn't stop. And then now they're just done, I think it was like one of the biggest national tours of any band in like the last. It was a big one. It was
18 or 24 shows or something like that.
I think it was 25.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, but I could be wrong on that. Yeah.
They're absolute legends, those blokes. Thanks so much for joining me today, mate. I really appreciate it. It was really, really awesome to meet you. For anyone that wants to follow along with what you do, can you let the people know where to find you?
Yeah, I mean, the best place would be on Instagram. So just Marigold Recordings on Instagram is kind of where I'm conducting most of my online stuff at the moment. And then personally, it's just my Instagram as well. So _Jon_Grace_.
Beautiful.
That's got everything.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, again, thank you. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And hopefully we'll catch up soon. But yeah, nice one. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time on What's That Sound podcast. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.